The immediate consequence of a criminal act is punishment. The term punishment is defined as pain, suffering, loss, confinement, or other penalty inflicted on a person for an offense by the authority to which the offender is subjected to. Punishment is a social custom, and institutions are established to give punishment after following criminal justice process, which insists that the offender must be guilty and the institution must have the authority to punish. In this lecture, we will be discussing about nature, concept, and various theories of punishment and their effectiveness in today's context. Nature of punishment. The primary operation of punishment consists announcing certain standards of behavior and attaching penalties for deviation, making it less eligible and then leaving individuals to choose. This is a method of social control which maximizes individual freedom within the coercive framework of the law in a number of different ways. The first moral duty of the community or of the state on its behalf is to reassert the broken moral laws against the offender who has broken it. For this reason, it must be affirm his guilt and deal with him in accordance with it. The intended effect of all legal threats, obviously, is to deter people from doing what the law prohibits. The threats must be carried out. Otherwise, the threats are reduced to bluffs and become incredible and therefore ineffective. Thus, all states punish people whom they identify as criminals. Neo-Kantians had proposed the concept of proportionality. When we say that the aim of the punishment is to prevent crime, then the punishment must fit the crime. We must accept that man avoids criminal behavior if that behavior elicits swift, severe, and certain punishment. Many studies by many sociologists and criminologists such as Gibbs, Kirikos, and Waldo and Tittle suggest that the severity and certainty of punishment are addictive factors. But evidence suggests that the severity and certainty of punishment are inversely related. Another facet of the punishment is that it cannot be benign to the criminal, but for the society, punishment is and should be benign process. So punishment is necessarily adverse to the interests of the criminal, but to the society it is not necessary. All punishments properly imply moral accountability. Community wants the punishment to reach the criminal's mind as well as his body. It wants him to suffer remorse for his evil deed, to realize that he had against him right as well as might. Unless the community believes these conditions are attained, it is unsatisfied and the object of punishment is not fully realized. Purpose of punishment. In primitive times, crimes were mainly attributed to the influence of evil spirits, and the major purpose of punishment was to placate the gods. Later, more stress was laid on social revenge because crime was considered a willful act of a free moral agent. Thus, punishment started primarily for revenge or to deter or in the interest of just balances of accounts between deliberate evildoers on the one hand and victim and enraged society on the other. According to Gardner, members of the society identify themselves with the victim. Hence, humans have the urge to punish the offender. According to Sir James F. Stephen, the purpose of punishment is to gratify the desire for vengeance by making the criminal pay with his body. Punishment gratifies the feeling of pleasure experienced by individuals at the thought that the criminal has been brought to justice. That desire ought to be satisfied by inflicting punishment in order to avoid the danger of private revenge. To carry out this purpose, we need an authority. A criminal has to be punished. According to Jackson Toby, punishing the criminals is necessary for three reasons: for preventing crime, for sustaining the morale of conformists, and for rehabilitation of offenders. Theories of punishment. There are 5 theories of punishments: deterrent theory, retributive theory, preventive theory, reformative theory, and expiatory theory. Retributive theory is the first and foremost. A child who falls down kicks the floor inadvertently. Generally, it is believed to be a form of taking revenge and would not serve any penal purpose. Deterrent theory, by punishing the offenders, deters the wrongdoer specially and deters the general public also by punishing him and refrain them from committing an act which is an offense. Preventive theory incapacitates an offender from repeating the crime, while reformative theory serves the purpose of rehabilitation of the offender. Jurists who support expiatory theory believe that if the offender expiates or repents, he must be forgiven. The Indian Penal Code is a combination or compromise between the underlying principles of all these theories. Let's now discuss all these theories in more detail. Retributive theory. Retribution is probably the oldest and most ancient justification for punishment, according to which a wrong is made right by an offender's receiving his just deserts. It involves a get-even spirit, at least since the formulation in about 1875 BC of the Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It has been urged by leaders and accepted by the general public that the criminal deserves to suffer. Many authorities have attempted to base the forms of human punishment on instinctive reactions, which might variously be called wrath, anger, resentment, or revenge. Both theologians and philosophers advocated the theory of retributive justice. In American society, a particularly offensive crime such as rape, kidnapping, cold-blooded murder calls out a wave of popular indignation and resentment. Even in the Indian society, we often hear of pickpocketers who are caught red-handed and are beaten black and blue. Injuries and wrongs frequently incite a spontaneous instinctive wrath and anger. Immanuel Kant notices that punishment inflicted neither benefits the criminal nor the society, but the sole and sufficient reason for inflicting punishment is the evildoer facing the evil. He did the evil, he suffered the evil. Retribution theory intends that a man deserves punishment because he has acted wrongfully. What retribution has insisted upon is that no man can be punished unless he has broken the laws. To be more precise, retributionists consider that the offender performed an action of a certain culpability, that the penalty will give satisfaction equivalent to the grievance caused by his action, that similar ones have been and will be imposed on similar offenders, that he was responsible for his action and performed it with knowledge of possible consequences according to a penalty system, and that unlike non-offenders, he has gained satisfaction on the commission of an offense. As it stands, it is worth consideration as a sufficient argument for punishing a man. It is believed that punishing the offender re-establishes the social harmony affected by the offense, and offender's guilt is washed away through suffering. Retributive policy in sentencing for capital offenses. There are 2 aspects in this theory. In the first aspect, conformists say lex talionis is right. A killer deserves to be killed. They do not want to offer any other explanation except that the criminal should die because he killed another. Another aspect of retributive theory also supports the doctrine of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but in a subtle way which is more philosophical. Retribution is to restore an objective order rather than to satisfy a subjective craving for revenge. This definition, given by Professor Ernest van den Haag, was challenged by many scholars of criminology. The major term in retributive doctrine is just desert, which suggests that criminals should not be punished capriciously. Yet, the retributionists fail to stipulate who is to determine the just desert for a particular type of crime. Deterrent theory. Retributive theory is based on the assumption that punishment is for the sake of punishment. It is suggested that evil should be returned for evil without any regard to consequences. Beginning with the age of reason in the 18th century, the aim of the criminal law has gradually changed from punishment for its own sake to punishment as a means of improving social behavior. Punishment is designed not to take revenge, but to terrorize the future offenders. An exemplary punishment should be given to the criminal so that others may learn a lesson from him. According to Manu, penalty keeps the people under control. Penalty protects them. Penalty remains awake when people are asleep, so the wise have regarded punishment as a source of righteousness. He continues, people are in check by punishment, for it is difficult to find a man who by nature sticks to the path of virtue. An 18th century judge, while awarding death sentence to a person guilty of stealing a sheep, observed, "You are to be hanged not because you have stolen a sheep, but in order that other may not steal sheep." Noted criminologist Sutherland divided this theory into two categories. General deterrence. The basic argument for general deterrence is that inflicting suffering upon those convicted of crime serves to terrorize others, and the punishment has great value for that reason, even if some individuals are not deterred. The mandatory type penalty structure deters crimes of intent. The criminal, when he commits a crime, should know that the judge does not have any discretion. The person who used a gun should know that he will be put in jail forever. That is the only way to solve the crime problem. If prevention of crime is the chief object of law, terror alone can achieve this goal, opined Lord Chief Justice Ellenborough. Many criticize this theory of deterrence. The deterrence principle is mechanistic, holding that varieties of crimes and varieties of punishments are to be finely balanced, that each punishment imposed on a criminal will have a significant impact on citizens at large, as well as directly on the criminal. In this view, the calculus of deterrence is the basis of criminal law. Lawmakers and others need to be careful in order to ensure that appropriate amounts of pain are inflicted on wrongdoers, thus convincing bystanders that the cost of committing a crime outweighs the benefits. Besides this, the principle of general deterrence is stated in economic terms also: pay the price of crime and pay his debt to the society. The parameters of deterrent theory, certainty and severity, are psychological variables. They vary depending upon various factors present in an individual and society as well. General deterrence was regarded as the principal purpose of punishment. Whenever a community experiences a significant increase in its crime rate, there may be an increase in certainty and severity of penalties arises based on the assumption that if more criminals are punished more severely, other persons will be effectively deterred from similar crimes. Specific deterrence. It is also maintained that punishment reforms criminals and that it does this by creating fear of repetition of the punishment. For example, when a boy touches a hot stove, he is painfully burnt, and in that way learns to avoid hot stoves. The philosophy of specific deterrence is very simple. Pain must be inflicted to get results. Law enforcement authorities practice the same upon criminals. Recently, thousands of experiments in human learning have been run in the effort to determine the relative values of rewards and punishments in human learning and performance, and these studies are considered pertinent to policies for the reformation of criminals. But the effects of punishment, even in these experimental situations, cannot be stated as a simple proposition. A mild punishment may promote learning, but a more severe punishment may cause terror and panic, which may interfere with the whole learning. Deterrence policy in capital offences. The belief that the death penalty is the supreme deterrent to murder is hardy, perennial, and deeply planted in the human mind and nourished by emotions. Death was, must be, was bound to be, could not help being a great deterrent than any other form of punishment, and therefore its abolition was bound to result in a large increase in whatever the crime in question was. Most people will not commit a crime if they know that they may be executed as a result. This is an outgrowth of man's instinct for self-preservation. Preventive theory. This theory was meant to restrain an offender personally from repeating a criminal act by incapacitating him by such punishments such as imprisonment, death, or exile. In ancient times, this form of punishment had a bearing on the nature of the crime, and member of the body most responsible for commission of such an offense thereof used to be incapacitated. For example, the hands of a thief have a major role in an offense of theft. Chopping the hands of the thief would hence incapacitate him from repeating theft. The punishment for perjury was cutting one's tongue. Capital punishment and exile served the purpose of incapacitating an offender, whatever may be the crime. This does not act much on the motive of the offender, but disable his physical power to repeat the offense. However, now the criminal justice system does not turn to barbaric punishments such as mutilation and exile, though death penalty is in the law books of many countries. The notion that punishment is necessary to protect the society from criminal had been growing in importance. Punishment is for social defense and solidarity. In such a background, prisons came handy to serve the dual purpose of protecting the society and punishing the criminal. The incarceration of the culprit has the result of severing him from the society and eventually preventing him from laying his hands again on similar crime or other crimes, at least temporarily for the period of incarceration. This is believed that the isolation and some sort of rigorous labor which will give a feeling of degradation and self-remorse. It may help in eradication of any future motive in his mind. Prisons not only serve the purpose of severing the culprit from the society, it further deprives him of his personal liberty, which one values most after one's own life. Thus, Sutherland as well as Barnes and Dieters, the modern criminologists observed preventive theory from a different angle. First, realizing the necessity of removing the social and economic forces that induce attitudes leading to delinquency and crime, and secondly, focusing attention on the individual who shows potentialities for antisocial behavior either because of biological and psychological handicaps or lack of social or economic opportunities for attaining a desirable integration. The first goal, which aims at creating such social and economic conditions in the society which prevent the offender to commit a crime, is very difficult to achieve. Then remains the second goal, focusing the attention on the individual. That is what precisely the modern criminologists advocate. As Krishna Iyer J. stated, the attention should be on criminal and not on the crime. Preventive policy in capital offences. The preventive theory, which is known as incapacitative theory, also is a good weapon in the armor of retentionists. Their argument is not to keep the offender behind the bars, though that amounts to incapacitation. They argue murderers are hanged not merely to deter people from meeting similar end, but to eliminate such offenders, lest they repeat their crime. In case of life imprisonment, the chances of parole, remission, pardon, commutation, etc. are available. Retentionists do not want any of such privileges to be available for a killer. Killing the killer is the best method of prevention, according to them. This theory is a two-edged weapon used for the argument of abolitionists also. They advocate that life imprisonment serves the purpose of prevention of crime. Incapacitating the prisoner behind the bars throughout his life is the best method of prevention. Professor Conrad says, person who has killed his wife at the spur of the moment, once in the prison are docile, guilty, and the survivors of an irreversible tragedy. They never repeat their crime. Reformative theory. Retribution and deterrence are the philosophies of the classical and neoclassical schools, with their emphasis on let the punishment fit the crime. The positive school, on the other hand, emphasizes the importance of the punishment fitting the criminal. It is the individual criminal, not the crime, that is the focal point in the positive thinking. Reformative theory emerged of such positive thinking. According to this theory, the object of punishment should be the reformation of the offender. This is not virtually a punishment, but a mere rehabilitative process. It aims at making the criminal as far as possible a better citizen by means of moral and ethical training, that is, teaching him to go straight as an upright man and meaningful citizen. This is based on the premise that a crime is not the result of an original sin in a criminal, but is much more a product of its environment, his lack of opportunity and training. Until the present century, almost all attempts to change criminals were mass methods designed to modify the criminal in some mechanical manner. The classical theory suggested that reformation would occur if enough pain were inflicted on the offender. In the past, efforts like meditation, generally enforced by isolation, moralizing by sermons in the name of God, mother, country, etc., getting offender to sign a pledge or in some other way make resolutions to live a law-abiding life, mechanical habituation were made to change the criminals. Although these ways have been carried over to the present, they reveal the importance of knowing more about human behavior than was known in the last centuries. The present century, researchers in the field of criminal science brought about a radical change. The methods explained above are used in present context also. But the difference between last century approach and present century approach is that in the last century, reformation was taken up on the mass level, and in the present century, every individual is treated separately and attended to individually. The present-day reformists advocate that sympathetic, tactful, and loving treatment of the offender would bring a revolutionary change in them. They want to punish criminals as little as possible and improve them as much as possible. Reformative theory and capital punishment. World over, the reformatory and rehabilitatory process of punishment are favored as a result of progressive changes in the penological field. The concept of retribution is outdated. The subject of punishment is neither to torture the criminal nor to undo his crime. The purpose of punishment is to deter others and reform the criminal. Expiatory theory. The theory of expiation rests on the belief that wrongdoing must be atoned for by a punishment which compensates for the crime. The term expiation is used here not in the sense of spiritual repentance, but in the objective balancing of the scales of justice. The degree of severity of punishment balances the degree of severity of the crime. Among many people, including the ancient Hebrews, a sacrifice was required to remove contamination when a divine law had been broken. To many people, even today, the infliction of punishment to atone for the offending act is necessary, even though there may be no predictable advantage to society in such doing. Sentences must be imposed to expiate the crime in accordance with the principle of compensation, regardless of any special or mitigating circumstances. Conclusion. Punishment must be directed to the good of the society. A punishment which prejudices rather than promotes the good order of society is not just, no matter how guilty the offender may be, how well founded the authority which imposed the punishment may be. There is a general belief that has persisted since the late 18th century that punishment must have an aim. Punishment is categorically imperative. The guilty criminal must be punished, but moral order demands that the punishment should be proportionate to the gravity of the offense. At times, incapacitation or reformation of the criminal and presenting his fate to the general public is important so that the like-minded may see what the consequences of a criminal act will be. Although there is no support to the view that the punishment has reduced crime to any marked degree. However, it is considered that punishment is the proper immediate consequence of the criminal act, a stage in the criminal justice system. It should be administered in such a way that the criminal's reconciliation to the community is not impeded.